Hello again, friends. Time for another In Other News. AKA, this is more important than you think it is. Maybe that's my new tagline for some of these stories. Because the In Other News story that none of you have heard about, and very few that heard about it even understand it, is that a couple days ago, and this is March 22nd, the double deuce of March. Look at the beautiful weather here in Blacksburg in March. But March double deuce, a couple days ago, the Prime Minister of Israel apologized, made a formal state apology to the Prime Minister of Turkey. What? Did you hear about that story? Do you have any idea what it's about? Do you have any idea that it actually has much bigger ramifications? Probably not, so let's get to it and do it and catch you up. First off, who the peeps are talking about. Let's entitle this one, by the way, talking about the peeps. Recep regains Turkish respect. Respect my Turkish authority. Wearing the red just for the Turk friends out there. So who's Recep? It looks like Recep, pronounced Recep. Prime Minister Recep Erdoğan of Turkey graciously accepted the apology of one Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. Now, first off, this is fascinating in that Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, for those of you in class right now, you know I've already described this guy. He's a pretty hawkish fellow. Fairly hawkish. Pro-military, pro-action, pro-first strike, particularly against Iran. And in that sense, not a very apologetic type of dude. So what's the deal with him apologizing to Turkey, and why is this such a big deal? I'm so glad you asked. Let's get to it. Because this, again, bigger repercussions than what meets the eye off of a simple story. The apology was for the Israeli government, the Israeli military, accidentally / unintentionally killing about 7, 8, or 9 Turkish citizens. What? How did that happen? Some sort of invasion? No, it's even trickier than that. This is a pretty complicated story that I know no news line, a single story anywhere in a newspaper or on the web can really get you the understanding of behind the scenes. And I'm not going to be able to explain it in full to you either because it's a really long story. But I'm going to do my best to give you the pieces that help you get it. So, how did a bunch of Turkish citizens get killed by the Israeli military? They were blockade busting. They were on a ship and part of this international coalition, supposedly, of some kind of peace-loving peoples that were trying to break through an Israeli blockade of the Gaza Strip. And in doing so, and by the way, everybody knew this was happening. The Turkish government knew it was happening. And these mostly Turkish citizens were doing this, but there was people from around the world as well on these ships. And the people on ships said, hey, look, we're going to break through this blockade and try to get food supplies and other stuff into Gaza Strip. Israel said, don't do it. We have a blockade against this country. We will stop you. And that's exactly what happened. And when they stopped this flotilla of ships coming into they were still in international waters, but getting near the coastline of the Gaza Strip, the Israeli military intervened. There was a skirmish. Perhaps some of the people on the ships were hitting the Israeli soldiers. It's still very murky. And Israeli soldiers opened fire and killed, again, 9 or 10 of these unarmed, I guess they had lead pipes, but no weapons, shooting weapons, and killed a bunch of these civilian, peace-loving people. It became a huge international incident. When this happened immediately, this is in 2010, by the way, the 2010 Gaza Flotilla Raid. When this happened, the Prime Minister of Turkey, Recep Erdoğan, a very popular leader across the Middle East, not just in Turkey, a huge law and order guy himself, a very religious guy, a very upstanding politician, and there ain't many of them, but also very vocal. And so he openly condemned Israel, said this was an act of state terror to have killed civilians, and demanded an apology and demanded compensation for the people, to the families of the people that died. Israel immediately said, hell no, which is a very typical Israeli response. And they said, we told these people not to come here. We told you we were going to do this. No way, we're not apologizing. We're not doing anything. Put that in your Hookah and smoke it, Erdoğan. We're not apologizing for nothing. 2 days ago they did. Okay, let's back the story up. What's up with this blockade? Gaza Strip is this little piece of land, I think it's only 50 miles long, wedged between Israel and Egypt. It is part of what may someday become Palestine. Gaza Strip is one part, the West Bank is the other part. Now, it used to be fully occupied by Israeli troops. They used to control the whole area, much the way that Israeli troops still occupy the West Bank. But a few years back, they actually pulled all the troops out and said, Gaza Strip, you're free and good to go as long as everything's chill. But of course, nothing was chill for very long. And I want to say the timeline here is like 2005, 2006 that the Israeli military pulled out of Gaza. Then what happened next was the Gaza Strip folks elected a government led of this political party named Hamas. Unfortunately, Israel and the United States and a few other countries think Hamas is a terrorist organization. So as soon as this happened, Israel and the United States and others said, no dice, we're not playing with Gaza anymore, we're not dealing with Gaza anymore, we're going to try to financially punish Gaza if we can. And then this group called Hamas, some radical elements of it, started lobbing rockets over the border at Israel. I don't know that they've ever killed anybody in Israel. They're more like kind of really big fireworks that they shoot over. Long story short, when Hamas started doing this, Israel said, that's it. Fine, we don't like this group of people in charge of Gaza Strip, so we're going to blockade it. We're not going to reinvade it, but we're going to blockade it. So they've had a full-on blockade since, I believe, 2008. Nothing goes in, nothing goes out that the government of Israel doesn't directly oversee. Now, that doesn't mean they're starving the people out. They allow food and medical supplies to go in, but no building construction materials, no heavy equipment. Obviously, nothing that could be contain gunpowder, no explosives, and no weaponry. So this full-on blockade has been in effect for going on 5 years. This is the thing that the international coalition of mostly Turkish people was trying to bust through. They were going to bust through this blockade and refuel, resupply Gaza Strip citizens, which they say, and many people in the world say, hey, this has been too punishing to the Gaza, ordinary Gaza population. They're not the ones, 90% of the people are not the ones throwing rockets and mortars over the border. You can't punish, you can't make this into a huge concentration camp and punish them all for the ill deeds of a few. And that's a view that most people on planet Earth have, including Recep Erdoğan, who has said from the get-go that this whole Israeli blockade of Gaza is semi-illegal and certainly immoral. And he's been very vocal about that. So when the blockade busters tried to go in there, got intercepted by Israeli military, a couple handfuls of people got killed. This became a huge international incident of which you heard nothing about. Because you live in America, we really don't cover news. So that is why that these two countries since 2010 have basically hated each other. Turkey and Israel, I won't say they cut off all diplomatic relations, but diplomats were pulled, ambassadors were pulled. They have been in a declining relationship for 2.5 years now since this exact thing happened. And it's not really good for anybody involved. And most people in America, maybe the world, but most Americans would probably think, well, who cares? Israel and Turkey aren't friends anyway. I mean, Turkey's a Muslim country and Israel's Israel. And everybody in the neighborhood hates Israel, so this is no big deal. Why would Israel apologize to Turkey? Who cares? What value could the relationship between Turkey and Israel really have? Time for the learning to begin. Turkey actually historically has been a very strong ally of Israel, perhaps the only strong ally of Israel in the bigger, wider region of which they both are in. Big time. Turkey, and you can check my facts, I believe Turkey was the first Muslim country to recognize the right of Israel to exist early on. I want to say like 1950. Turkey has had open diplomatic relations with Israel since Israel's creation in 1948. So, saying they're a really strong ally is perhaps suggesting a little too much, but certainly Turkey's the strongest ally Israel has in the region. Of course, the United States is Israel's greatest ally, but here's the deal. Turkey is a huge friend and ally of the United States as well. So what we have, our vested interest as Americans is looking at us saying, hey, wait a minute, these are two countries that we're friends with both of these guys. strategic partners with both of these guys. Turkey is a NATO member, for Pete's sake. There are U.S. air bases in Turkey, and they've been there for 5 decades. So these are two strategic allies which used to like each other a lot more. The last 3 years, so we didn't like this. And U.S. President Barack Obama, since all this happened, has said, hey, can you guys like sort that out? Because you're really our two best friends in the region, and now our best friends hate each other. And given that Turkey has recognized the right of Israel to exist, really they've been the model that Israel and other countries like the United States have been touting as, hey, all you other Middle Eastern countries, you should be like Turkey. You should be friends with Israel. You should recognize that there's going to be a two-state solution. You should recognize the right of Israel to exist and recognize that there's hopefully eventually going to be a Palestine. So are you starting to see why this particular incident was of pretty crucial importance actually to Israel? And Recep Erdoğan, again, a very strong, charismatic prime minister who's well-respected across the entire region, was pissed about all this. And he made his opinion quite open. And this has degraded, quite frankly, Israel's position across the greater Middle East. Now, what's happened since then? This is 2010, all this hit the fan. Oh, I don't know, that whole thing called the Arab Spring. The Arab revolutions, where country after country is getting, their governments are getting overthrown and replaced, and including one Egypt, the most important player in all this Arab Spring business. And as soon as Hosni Mubarak, the former dictator of Egypt, who recognized Israel, because he was buddies with the U.S., as soon as he got overthrown, immediately everybody started scrambling in Israel and other places going, holy crap. Is Egypt now going to not recognize Israel anymore? And given that Turkey was on the outs with Israel at this time, this is like worst case scenario for Israel. See why it's so important? That the one best friend, the one good friend that Israel had in the neighborhood was on the outs with them right when all this revolution starts rising up around the state of Israel. Revolutions which might undo or renegotiate the tentative peace agreements that these surrounding countries have had with Israel. That's why it's been a very big deal. That's why the United States has said, oh, dude, please, can you guys please get back on the same page? And that's why U.S. President Barack Obama, who's in Israel and the Middle East right now on a tour, he went to Israel for his first foreign trip in his second term of office, and tried to smooth things over. And I believe, insider info not required, that this came up and he did probably finally convince the Israelis to soften their rhetoric on this particular issue and get Turkey back in their camp. And that's exactly what has happened in the last 48 hours. The Israelis came forward and said, you know what, we were pretty hardcore about that. Yes, it was a mistake to have the military be too aggressive in that 2010 Gaza Flotilla Raid. Yes, we are sorry that people died. And yes, we will recompensate the families of the victims. Now can we be buddies again? And it looks like Recep Erdoğan has said, Prime Minister of Turkey, Recep Erdoğan has said, okay, that's cool. This is a big win for Turkey. It's not necessarily a big loss for Israel. Because again, put it in the context. There's so much turbulence going on in the greater Middle East right now. Israel's greatest threat is Iran. At least that's their self-defined greatest threat. I don't think it is, but they do, and they're in charge of their country. And so they're worried about Iran. They're worried about that they're going to have to possibly strike Iran. They've been trying to get the United States on board to strike Iran. And let's not forget the other little thing that's still going on called the Arab Spring, where there is still revolutionary activities in all of the countries surrounding Israel. Not the least of which is this place called Syria. And here's where I want to bring it full circle and wrap this crazy podcast up. In the middle of a snowstorm. I think that this coming back together of diplomatic relations between Turkey and Israel actually spells doom for Syria. And I think the Syrian situation has probably played figuratively into Netanyahu's move to cozy back up to the Turks. What do I mean by this? Well, Israel hates Iran. U.S. hates Iran too. But Israel hates Iran. everybody knows that Iran has been supplying Hezbollah and other terrorist groups with money and guns, some of which are used against Israel. Iran is outright and open, will never recognize Israel, hates Israel, and, there's been lots of quotes or misquotes from Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad that he thinks Israel should be eliminated from planet Earth, or something to that effect. So, Iran has been supplying money and guns, some of which used against Israel. Terrible relations between these two countries. And that's really Israel's greatest concern. How have the Iranians supplied money and guns to people who have used them against Israel? Through Syria. Syria and Iran are big buddies. Starting to see the pieces come together here. So Israel, I think, is starting to very quickly sober up to the realization that, okay, there's this big civil war thing going on in Syria. Syria's getting ready to crumble. The regime's getting ready to fall. It truly, at this point, it's only a matter of time. And the United States, Turkey, and Israel all would like to see the Syrian regime leave. Leave planet Earth and life. But we're all, those three entities are all worried about who will take that regime's place. Will it be some radical Islamic groups? Will it be some other radical group that's continued to be financed by Iran? It's in Turkey's and Israel and the United States' best interest to make sure that that doesn't happen in Syria. So what they're all doing right now, I believe, is kind of starting to work together behind the scenes to take out the Syrian leadership now as quickly as possible. No one has gotten openly involved in the Syrian civil war yet. But you know what? The reason I'm doing this podcast is it seems like a whole bunch of things are falling into place all of a sudden. A whole bunch of coincidences are happening all of a sudden to make it look like outside intervention's getting ready to roll out. And by the way, I never believe in coincidences. So what am I talking about? First off, this apology. Kablamo. Why right this second would Israel decide to apologize and cozy back up to Turkey? Because both countries have a goal of getting rid of the Assad regime. That's the guys in charge of Syria. Point two, coincidence two. The United States and other countries around the world have said there's a red line. There's a red line that the Syrian regime can cross. And the red line is if they use chemical weapons, then we will probably intervene to stop the use of chemical weapons, even though it's a civil war in a sovereign state. Coincidence alert! Suddenly, somehow, somewhere, a couple days ago, somebody used something that might be chemical weapons. And if you think that I'm just putting it that way because I don't know the facts, I'm putting it that way because nobody knows the facts, and the whole thing looks freaking murky as hell to me. Now, I'm no fan of the Syrian regime. They can all burn in hell, and they all soon will. But this claim that chemical weapons have suddenly been used in the last 3 or 4 days, on top of coincidence one, which is Israel apologizing to Turkey, and now they're working together more. And let's finish off with a coincidence three. U.S. President Barack Obama just happens to go to Israel right now, and he's probably heading over to Turkey next. I don't believe in coincidences. I think we're seeing coordinated policy unfold before our very eyes in real time and really quickly, that these entities are now saying, we're going to go ahead and take out this Syrian regime. It's time. We now have a made-up excuse. Maybe they use chemical weapons. And now we have the whole team back on board. Israel to the south, Turkey to the north, and the United States, which is everywhere, that can do something. Remember, Turkey's a NATO member. There are already NATO forces in Turkey. About 6 months ago, Turkey said, hey, by the way, we're worried about Syria invading our airspace or hurting our citizens, and we're a NATO member, so we request NATO assistance to have some anti-missile stuff on the border between Turkey and Syria, and perhaps troops to get ready to do something if we have to do it. And the NATO people said, here, here, we agree. So you have NATO in there, the U.S. president's there right now, Turkish-Israeli ties remended, and a possible use of chemical weapons, which everybody has said will be the linchpin that causes action to happen in Syria. Boom! Woo! I'm exhausted after that assessment/prediction in the snow in Blacksburg here on March 24. What do you think about that? Watch it happen. Somebody please watch this podcast and let's check our watches. Let's all synchronize our watches. I think something's going to happen in Syria soon. And this is no coincidence of an apology and compensation occurring between the Israeli and Turkish governments at this exact juncture in history. Learn anything? I hope so. Got any further questions? I hope that too. Hit me up. Let's have a discussion. Let's chat it out. But for now, let's keep our eye on Syria and Turkey and Israel, now newfound friends once again, and see what the United States cooks up to do in Syria.